Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where frontline sales leaders teach you how to build and scale an outbound sales team. Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by David Summers. He's the Director of Sales and Customer Enablement over at GetLab. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Man, thanks for coming on. This is I've been looking forward to this because it was a couple of years ago, a friend of mine, I was learning about the sort of remote work culture, and a friend had sent me something that not only your CEO had sort of recorded a video, but also he sent me a GitLab repository, and it had everything. It seemed like everything that your company has ever written about not just remote work, but the company handbook. I lost hours in GitLab, just browsing around, clicking around. Okay, how did they do this? How did they do that? We have, your source documents linked in a bunch of our sort of company, like as we were building the company and some of the core docs, we linked to that handbook a couple of times. And so when we got introduced, I was really excited because not only do we get to I love that sort of open philosophy about how you guys are building your company, but I love what you're doing, what you did at Red Hat. And I love that sort of journey that you're on here at GitLab. So I'm really genuinely excited to have you on the show here.
Yeah, it's exciting. So yeah, I've been in open source for the last dozen or so years, been last a little under a year at GitLab, and mission is that everybody can contribute. And I thought I knew what that meant, and I did have a healthy respect and recognition of what that is at Red Hat. But then yeah, like you said, coming over to GitLab, everything been on the handbook, our policies and procedures, transparent, everybody can see, and just the amount of collaboration across not only within GitLab, but just outside with the community. It's really, it's exciting to be a part of this. And I think the growth speaks to itself, that it's really something that our customers, our partners, and employees it resonates.
It's a hard idea not to get behind, just having everything out there. As we're building things, we're very information driven business. And so I've always believed that, it's when Aaron and I first merged, there was a slightly different attitude with some of the people that worked here. And I was I got here because I was able to learn all these things. We should share everything. And then if people want to, buy our services, they're coming to us as more educated buyers. And so all of that sharing is just making them better at what they're doing. It means we can focus on sort of higher level stuff, higher order engagements.
Yeah, and I think 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, it was a newer concept. But look, I think it's well understood and recognized that approach and being open and collaborative and transparent spurs innovation. Right? You can just get more done. You can deliver more value by having multiple folks kind of share their perspectives and be able to contribute, whether it's code or any other ideas. There's a friend of mine manages the opensource.com, great information for how open source principles are being applied to, not just in the tech world, but in all aspects of life, government, business, et cetera.
Interesting. That must be, that's a friend I might want to talk to at some point. We've been thinking of, and another reason I was excited to have you on the show is we've been thinking about, we've been building a sales development playbook ourselves, right? And so many people come and say, well, hey, can we pay you to build the sales development playbook? And it hasn't been something we've done. We've done it for a couple of people as sort of bespoke, but there's only a certain number of people that can afford to pay somebody to build a playbook for them. And I thought, well, what about all the rest of the people? And so as we've been building, I've been building a sales development playbook for one of our core services. And I've been thinking, man, I'd love to open source this in a way, but it's all built in Google Docs. So I'm at the end of the episode, I might, maybe we can sort of geek out on tactically how we can do that. And we'll go through the whole episode first so that people that don't want to listen to that can just sort of zone out or tune out, but we'll come back to that at the end.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome, man. And so basically what we're talking about today is how you connect training and enablement to professional development. So first, maybe before we talk about the impact, so talk to me about what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think a common misperception that a lot of folks have is when you think of, particularly when I look back at my career and think about how do I grow as a sales team, is looking at, all right, well, we need to add headcount. Right? We need to add capacity to be able to deliver better sales results. And I think that's certainly part of it, right? But a big missing piece that I think a lot of leaders miss out on, but many of them understand it too, but it's also about how do you take the existing folks and then make them even more productive and more efficient at their job and get them excited about that. So that's kind of that one piece of like improving sales productivity. The math equation isn't just about adding capacity. It's about taking the existing capacity and making them 5%, 10%, 15% better, and fostering and embracing this culture of continuous learning and continuous development. Now, combine that with the concept of when you look at, there's a lot of cost to an organization when key talent leaves. And it's known that like there's just a natural rate of attrition that happens in the sales world. So how do you limit that as a leader? And I think part of that is you look at studies, people often don't leave companies, they leave their managers. They look for the next big opportunity. And the opportunity isn't, is oftentimes money and how they advance their career, but it's often other things, right? The ability to make a difference, the ability to grow in their role and position themselves for the next thing, whether it's at your company, at another company. So I think a key element is as you look at training and development is making sure you connect the dots between the things you're doing to improve in your current role and the training you're going through and the enablement, the time that you're investing in that isn't just about because somebody's telling you got to do it. It's about investing in yourself and making and looking at how you can continue to build out your skill sets to a vision or an idea of where you want to get to next year, in 5 years, et cetera. So by connecting those topics to where a sales rep can see that, all right, this company, my manager, this environment is helping me better myself and get me to a better position for medium to long-term success, then I think it naturally mitigates that attrition risk.
And I think especially when you're dealing with sales teams, especially because if you have a sales development team or if you've got a feeder team for your account execs, if you're not just, if you're a company that wants to grow your own talent, you need to have some sort of process to level people up from recent college grad to sales professional to, senior sales leader. Like that's quite the journey. And if your company is large enough and has the supporting infrastructure to get you there, that's a massive value add.
Yeah, and folks, that if that doesn't exist, right, you can think of yourself, I'm stuck, right? How do I get to maybe I'm role X? How do I get to senior role X? And but if your growth is limited to just that definition and it's not like other roles, whether it be in sales, outside of sales, then you might feel stuck in your career, and that's when you jump to another company. But there's so much investment that the company has made in that individual to learn like how things are done, how the customers and the organizations that we sell to and the value that we provide. That's a huge investment that walks out the door when they leave. So if you can do a good job of looking at, what are the skill sets and the knowledge that this person has, and what is the delta between what they have today and what they want to get to in the future, and how do we facilitate that, right? Whether it be some job rotations, whether it be going through some formal training, whether it's learning through others and mentoring and shadowing. So really helping to make those connections so folks feel like, look, I have a career here. There are places I can go. I'm not stuck.
Exactly. And it's that stuck feeling. I've seen friends, colleagues, employees leave places because they felt stuck for one reason or another, right? The opportunities and, sort of the nature of a small company, there aren't always the opportunities that is the next step for an individual. And so sometimes that next step is outside the company. But I think the hardest piece is when I've been working for a large company and there are no opportunities, right? And everybody above you is, they're not moving anywhere. And there's no culture of let's get a little bit better, right? Let's try and sort of foster that growth within the organization. It's this sort of stagnant, do your job and just like shut up and do your job, hit your numbers and go home. And I think it's not poisonous, but it's one of the most demoralizing environments for somebody who's young and hungry to learn and grow and invest in themselves. And so I love that this is a big part of the culture. And I love that this is sort of this is something that you're really passionate about and that we're gonna jump into today. I love, we've talked about some of the benefits, but I'd love to, if you've got some examples of the impact that you've seen this have before.
Yeah, so I'll draw from experiences at my previous employer at Red Hat, where I was director of our sales enablement programs globally. And we had, throughout the time there, now I won't try to say this is the only reason why, but Red Hat consistently had lower than average tenure, right, relative to our peers. And I think a lot of that was just how great of a company Red Hat is and was to work with. But I'd certainly think, part of that is by I'd like to think some of it's by the work that our team was doing and was continuing to do, and I'm sure is continuing to do today, to really make sure we align those development conversations with what we're doing from a training enablement perspective, and having a mix between, I know this may be something we dive into a little bit more later, but looking at, there's some things that are going to be critical change initiatives for the business, right? Of we need to either improve knowledge and or change behavior to get to some desired outcomes that we're all seeking. And those are going to be things that we need to do because it makes sense for the business. I think it's imperative that at least some component of that also be reserved for things that are helpful to me and personalized to me. And so a one size fits all training plan for every single sales rep just doesn't make sense in today's environment. So more specific examples of those, I think it's looking at, there could be a number of different training and enablement offerings that you have, but just having a manager actually sit down with their associate and talk about where they want to be in 5 years, whatever time horizon, and identify that what are those skill gaps, and then finding things, whether they be internal offerings that we have or supporting an associate going external to participate in a conference, right, or consume some kind of training offering that's on one of the online learning platforms. Those are some of the more specific examples of kind of how.
I had a question pop up. It's a little bit of a left turn from what we initially talked about, but when you're talking about leveling up an individual and they're working on their skills, what does that look like in your organization, or just maybe not necessarily at GitLab, but say in an ideal organization, whether it's Red Hat or GitLab or wherever, you've got the sort of base level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. What does it look like to say, I want to go from, okay, I'm junior, I want to go to level 1, level 1 to level 2. Like, what does the sort of coaching process look like? What does the level up process look like? Is it hey, you meet these skills, congratulations, gold star? Is it, you get to stand up and sort of, run the gauntlet, so to speak? Like, what have you seen there?
Yeah, a few ideas come to mind there. I think first off, it is important to provide clarity of what are those different levels. And I've made mistakes in the past of making those very soft and fuzzy and qualitative.
Little nebulous. People are like, I don't know, like maybe I hit this, maybe I don't.
And this is so easier said than done. And it's a complicated thing because when you look at all the things that we expect salespeople to know and be able to do and be able to articulate, it's a lot. And so by trying to distill it down into certain levels, it's impossible to do it for just, well, it's not impossible, but you do need to break it up into different categories and look at that. But I think, what that looks like is being specific of what those different levels, what does it look like, right? Being able to tell and share with an associate or team member what good looks like. All right. And so they can see an example, maybe even point to others in the team, but it's having those conversations and being, very transparent and direct about, hey, this is what I've observed, this behavior, here's the situation, this is the behavior I observed, and this is the impact of where you're having good positive impact, but you could have even more if you, demonstrated this kind of behavior. And again, point to an example of where you see that happening in other parts of the organization, and then building out, what is that action plan? So I think another thing that's important to think about is when you look at how people learn, and there are a bunch of studies out there that show, look, only 10% of what you learn is in a formal environment. And even when you do formal training, There's also a lot of research out there that says, shockingly, within even a week, the retention of that information trails off. Really, where the magic happens is embracing the notion of learning through others, social learning, but then really learning by doing. So a lot of this too, as you start to put together an action plan, one of the mistakes I made earlier on is saying, oh, well, the action plan is to do this training or go to this conference. Like, that doesn't do it. That doesn't bridge the knowing doing gap. What you really have to do is provide some opportunities where that person can flex and actually apply it, right? And they're going to make mistakes and learn along the way. And you've got to have an environment that embraces allowing them to make those mistakes and kind of fail fast, learn from that, and then start to build out that capability. So this also requires some maturity of the team member to understand, look, this isn't an exercise of, if you check these 5 boxes of that are tactical activities, now you're eligible for promotion. It's much more nuanced than that. It's like, yes, those are going to be maybe provide you with some knowledge, but you've got to be able to show that you can consistently demonstrate application of that knowledge in a real world environment. But it's up to the manager, I think, to help facilitate an environment where you allow that to happen.
And it's challenging because if you're, on the one hand, if you get too quantitative about it, you have to be able to demonstrate consistently hitting this number, this number, this number. You almost did, like, I've been in a situation where we've disadvantaged top performers because they come out of the gate and they just crush it. And they're like, well, I can't level up because we had one account manager and she was amazing. She's like, I can't level up because I can't hit my customer numbers because none of my customers have left. And so I can't handle any more customers, but everybody else has lost, 2 or 3, and I've never lost a customer, and I'm 7 months in, and like, I'll just never sort of hit my customer, that sort of one metric. And so that's like, we got too quantitative about it. But if you're too qualitative about it, then it's sort of fuzzy and unclear, and people don't know why, so-and-so got promoted and so-and-so didn't, or why, when should I be kind of leveling up? How do you balance those two?
Yeah, it's a great question, I don't know that there's a perfect answer. I think it depends, but it's got to be both. Like, we all know the examples of, hey, here's a salesperson that he or she, blew it out of the water. They did awesome, but they maybe didn't do it in the right way, right? Is this somebody you'd want to, for example, you're thinking about your next sales kickoff. Is this really the person you'd want to put on a main stage and say, everybody be like this person? Mm-hmm. Well, we want them to hit the numbers, but we want them to not knock down all the trees in the process of doing so. So that's why I think that qualitative element of how you get things done, how effectively do you collaborate with others? What would your peers say about, working with you and what that is like? Those might not be the right answers, but my point is, it's got to be somebody that it's a mix of kind of what results you produce, and then also how are you contributing to the culture and the type of work environment that you as a manager and as an organization want to promote. Mm-hmm.
I love that it's that sort of blend. I read this book, How Google Works, and they actually talked about, they sort of lay everything out, and then they have they basically allow their people, and I believe it's Google, but if you're listening and I've got it wrong, quote me, or like email me and tell me I've got it wrong, but I'm pretty sure somehow Google works. But basically any of their employees can say, I feel like I meet these criteria, and they submit their sort of level up to their boss. And I think they did it that way. And it wasn't just to their boss, but it was sort of to a committee. And then the committee would sort of hear their case, or not case, but, hear the level up. And that was sort of their way of preventing sort of direct managers from like keeping people down that actually do are hitting their sort of criteria. What is that like? How do you feel about something like that, a process like that? Have you seen that live before? Have you seen sort of elements of it? Is this a terrible idea, a great idea?
I haven't seen that before, but I like the idea. Another thing that's something that's important to me and other folks at GetLab is when you think about the tech environment, look, let's be honest, it's dominated by a lot of white men. it is not the best environment that really promotes diversity and inclusion. So we have a number of initiatives and concerted efforts to improve that. And I think this is a good example of that, is because we all have unconscious, subconscious biases, right? That even we don't even know that that may be different treatment of different people in the team. And I don't mean this just to be about, race or gender, but any kind of differences, right? And I think something like that would help to diffuse that, where you could remove that from the equation, and you do have, as long as you have that objective set of, look, these are the things that merit consideration for an increase. And look, let it be about the facts. Let it be about the data and making the case for that. So anything that helps get to a better place of saying, hey, here's the data, and let's have an objective evaluation to make sure we've got, we're rewarding individuals for a job well done and what they're bringing to the table, all for that.
Perfect. I do want to be mindful. I kind of took us on a bit of a left turn. I want to bring us back to, what we talked about. Because really I love and I appreciate you sort of joining me on the left turn, because I do think that's super important. The way that you have implemented this, or maybe can you talk to me about how you have sort of connected training and professional development? I know you did it at Red Hat and you're working on it at GitLab. So can you talk to me about, what that looks like specifically in this context?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I do think it is a journey. It's not something you can just, snap your fingers and do. I think there's definitely some foundational work that needs to be done. And we're very much part of that journey at GitLab. So the Sales and Customer Enablement team started when I joined just over 7 months ago, and building out that team. A couple of immediate priorities that have been focused on with our growth. We've almost doubled in size since I joined the company, again, just over 7 months ago. So how we onboard our sales folks and accelerate their time to productivity has been a top priority, as well as introducing a more consistent, standardized, customer value-driven methodology for how we go about doing sales, and really an integrated go-to-market motion between sales and marketing. So I think to answer your question of, how do you get started? I think a critical piece is really dissecting what does good look like. And I'll say more about that, is like, when you think of there is, one of the critical things for sales onboarding is to look at, for each role, I do think it needs to be both role-based and tenured-based. So looking at, for this particular role, let's say it's an enterprise, we call them strategic account leaders. For those, what does good look like? What does the person need to know? What does the person need to be able to do, to be able to articulate, to be able to show, to be successful in their role? And that, so Tanner Mazel from DSG, I'm sorry, Tanner, if I messed up your name, but this framework, the No Do Say Show, is from DSG. And I think this is critical to understanding, first of all, what are all those things that allow someone to be successful in a strategic account leader role? And then to do the same thing for a sales development rep, the same thing for other types of roles. So that's kind of the role-based lens. And you can look at commonalities, but then, because there are some core things that for GitLab, everybody goes through the same kind of initial 30 days if you're a quota-carrying salesperson. But then after that, generally the first several weeks, then we do start to introduce some role-specific learning tracks. Mm-hmm. So the other piece is, tenure-based. So when you say the No Do Say Show, like, this can be overwhelming to a new person. So you really have to break that down as to say, what does good look like at the 30-day mark, at the 60-day mark, at the 90-day mark? How will we measure that? How will we know when someone has surpassed that particular milestone? So I think that's core work that goes into first understanding what good looks like in that role. And I think, so how you connect it to professional development is, first off, we're trying to make sure we nail a good sales onboarding experience. And I think we've done a really good job. There's still lots of room for improvement. Once you have that down, we can start to look then at a model that allows managers to have one-on-one tailored conversations with their reps to say, here are the things that you're doing well, and let's identify maybe one or two things that if you were better, like if you knew something more, if you had developed this skill, this would allow you to be all the more successful. What are those 1 to 2 things? And let's focus on making sure that you're reserving some time and being thoughtful about beefing up that knowledge or improving that skill set. And so I think that's where the magic happens of connecting training enablement to really what that person is looking to do. With the example I just gave was something in the role. But over time, right, you can also look at, okay, great. These are the 1 or 2 things that you're looking to improve upon within your current role. But let's also make sure we're having regular, at least quarterly conversations of what does the next role look like for you? Where do you want to get to? What do people, so when you think about that future role, what are the skills and the knowledge that somebody in that role needs to have? And what is the delta between what you have, and how do we close that delta?
And I love that you're sort of bringing some structure and some process to it, because it's easy to say I want to help my team grow, but it's also really easy to get caught up in the day to day of just like working on this, working on that, and forget to have those conversations.
It is. It's something that I don't profess to be the best at it. Former folks in my team would tell you, yeah, sometimes it slipped for us too, right? Because of the craziness of everything that's going on. I found that, you just have to put something in your calendar. You have to make some milestones. You have to make some commitments to each other, and where the team holds each other accountable. But I think also, I think part of this isn't all on the manager. Look, a lot of it is and should be for all the right reasons, but this is also something that each associate needs to assume some responsibility for themselves. And if they're not having those regular conversations, don't just sit back and say, well, my manager's not talking to me about it, therefore I'm not learning in this role. No, like, take the initiative. Tell your manager you want to talk about this. If your manager is not open to it, find somebody else, find a mentor, find a peer, find somebody, there are plenty of resources you can tap into to have those kinds of conversations. So I think having that initiative, that drive, that self-accountability is important as well. But you got to make time for it. You got to put some things in your calendar, because inevitably, right, the whirlwind happens. We all get busy. We all get things crazy at work, crazy at home. You got to just make time for it.
For sure. And the thing I love about what you're doing here is that, one, it makes it easier on 2 fronts. Just like you said, if you don't have that supportive manager, or if things are just too busy with that day-to-day manager, everything is documented, right? And it may not be as sort of in-depth as if you were sitting down with your manager, but you can always sort of rifle through things and see, okay, what's coming next, right? And and specifically at GitLab, you have this repo of a repository of all this information that says this is like what good looks like here, this is what good looks like here, this is what good looks like here. So on the one side, if you're not getting that, it makes it so much easier to just go and find that information. So even if we aren't the size of GitLab, simply having that information public within the company is going to do everybody a service. And I think the second thing that I love about this and the journey is that I suspect one of the reasons why this doesn't happen more frequently is, as a manager, we maybe don't feel, well equipped to have this conversation. Maybe we don't know. Maybe we don't want to be, we're not sure like what that next level looks like, especially if you don't have any of this documented, right? And maybe there isn't that sort of, maybe either you're worried there isn't that career path. But when you come at it sort of candidly, openly transparent about, here's what career paths look like, here's what good looks like at each level, as a manager, it makes it really easy to see and say, okay, well, I now know how to, like, what direction to drive my team members in. Because it'd be so easy if you don't know, then, well, I'm not really sure what to do. So maybe you have it, it doesn't really go anywhere, it's not super valuable. You can give them feedback on, like, okay, well, maybe I've taught them everything I need to know, but laying it out this way, where you've sort of built up, here's all the steps, here's what you need to do to hit each step, it gives that manager something that's sort of documented and, like, this is what we need to strive for.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think another thing that we've learned along the way is, even with all those things and all the good intentions, I touched upon it earlier, but particularly having been in a sales role before and having been on quota, I think I empathize and appreciate the challenges and the difficulty of being in a sales role where you're under the gun to hit the number, right? And it's real black and white of what success looks like, in terms of your quota. When you think, I touched upon earlier, of like we expect a sales rep to know a ton of things and be able to do a pretty broad set of things to be successful in their role. So another element of structure that we've added to this at Red Hat, and introducing this and leaning more and more into this at GitLab, and I'll share my screen, is a framework that, again, whether the manager leads this discussion or if the associate leads it themselves. But over time, right, I chronicled and inventoried all the things that we expect sales folks to know, and did some affinity analysis to where broke this out into different categories. And so this can be used to just make the complex less complex. So breaking this down into categories such as, hey, how well do you understand the ideal customer profile that you're calling into, and the personas and each of those personas careabouts? How well are you able to serve as a trusted advisor and understand what's happening in the industry and the implications to the customer's environment? Can you articulate an effective value proposition, right, that's going to get an executive's attention and want to have a conversation with us to learn more about how we can help, looking at how we beat out competitors, and also where competitors may have an advantage over us, and to avoid those landmines and not waste time going after deals where maybe it's not the best fit. And then products, services, how well you understand that. And then this is a big meaty one here, but functional skills and processes. You can think that of, there are functional skills that are, soft skills that are not even sales specific, but here I'm thinking, functional skills like negotiation skills or closing or prospecting, but then processes of how do I quote? How do I work with legal? Just a number of things. So by breaking these down into these 6 categories, it makes the conversation, the feedback I've heard from sales managers that I've worked with, is it makes the conversation just less intimidating. You can talk to your sales rep and say, hey, where are you good here? Where do you feel like you're sufficiently proficient in these areas? And then where do you want to improve upon? And at least helps to hone the conversation into specific target areas. And it makes that, you said earlier, I think sometimes the conversations don't happen because sales managers perhaps don't feel equipped. I think anything we can do to help a sales manager have an easier time with that conversation and provide not too much structure, not too much formality, but just a little bit, some guidance of how to have that conversation in a more easy way is going to have benefits.
Oh, for sure. And I'm curious, so one, if you're not following along, I'll throw a screenshot in the show notes. But you can also check out the GetLab page that we were just looking at. And like I mentioned at the top of the episode, everything here is open source, meaning it's all in these repositories that I think traditionally came from engineers sharing their code and having a place where anybody could sort of commit anything and comment, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you're not an engineer, I'm not going to explain how Git works, but there's a link that's basically like a giant wiki for everything you would want to know about being in sales and working at GetLab. So I'll throw that link in there. That was the page that we were just looking at. Highly recommend checking that out. Fair warning, you're going to get lost in here and you're going to spend a lot of time because there's so much valuable stuff there. So back to the episode. So these 6 categories, where did they come from? How did you go about figuring these out?
It was during the job task analysis and really focusing on, for sales onboarding, if you're looking at, we want to accelerate time to productivity. So what does that mean? What does success look like? What does good look like at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? So by documenting all that and getting feedback from sellers, from sales management, again, it was this long laundry list. And so where it came from was doing some affinity analysis to kind of put them into natural groupings. I think another where it came from was it had exposure to and experience with in the past of competency frameworks. And competencies, right, are the skills, the knowledge, the attitudes that you need to have to be successful in your role. What I found is that the inherent limit, there's lots of goodness in competency. So don't misunderstand what I'm about to say is to say competencies aren't good. No, they're super helpful. The missing element for me when I was looking at sales competencies and talking with sales teams about that is, what about like their knowledge of certain topics? That's not necessarily a skill or a behavior or an attitude, but it was a missing piece. And it's not that it was intentionally ignoring knowledge, but I think the 6 categories of learning is an attempt at fusing those together, where it's a combination of both. It's not just what you need to do and how you need to behave and the attitude you have, but a lot of it too is, look, are you technically competent, or do you have the requisite knowledge that when you demonstrate that behavior, that it's the knowledge combining with the behavior that really gets to proficiency. Mm-hmm. Those are a couple areas of where it originated from.
And I'm curious because, like, I had to bear with me one second here. This is interesting. I feel like I had a great question queued up, and then I started listening to what you were saying, and it totally went blank here. Because we were talking about, sort of the 6-stage framework, and I started thinking about not questions, but sort of, and it's coming back to me here, but basically like tests and certifications. And like I was browsing through here. And so there's kind of 2 questions, but I'll start with this sort of tests and certifications. Are there, like, it's one piece to sort of put up these links on a sales training Git. But how do you know if somebody has sort of watched them, listened to them? Like, are there certifications? Are there tests?
Yeah, great question. And I think an often mistake that especially enablement teams make is looking at just activity and, right, have they viewed this and have they done that? Look, at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. There are a number of helpful frameworks out there too. So the Kirkpatrick model, Burson model, but looking at measurement. So think of a pyramid. At the very top, everything should start with, what business outcome am I trying to influence? But oftentimes those business outcomes, right, more revenue, more pipeline, things like that, often those are lagging indicators. And so what you then need to look at is, what are in level 3 is looking at behaviors. So what are the behaviors that we want to drive and influence that we believe, we're fairly confident, will lead to those desired outcomes, those lagging indicators. And furthermore, like level 2 looks at, what knowledge do you need to have towards that, getting to those desired outcomes. And then level 1 metrics are more like utilization, consumption, things like that. So I think it's easy. That's one of the advantages of those level 1 metrics, is it's easy to be able to say, all right, this is how many people clicked on this video or watched this video. But again, if all you're doing is level 1, you're not connecting it to business outcomes, you failed. So assessments and become milestones that verify that someone actually has gained the knowledge that you've defined up front and is able to demonstrate the behavior. Those are critical. So I'll give you an example for sales onboarding. And one of the things with open source is this notion of a minimal viable product, right? An MVP. And then you continue to iterate over time, and you call those MVCs, minimal viable changes. So as an MVP, we put out there, we define what some of the know, do, say, show elements were. We put together a series of videos to watch. We put some sequencing in there to guide a new salesperson through, what they need to know. And then we started looking at, all right, well, how do we assess whether or not they actually understood this? So you start with those, what were the learning objectives and how do we test for that, make sure the content maps to that, but then even behavior. How do we do things like, one of the things in our onboarding program is to have folks submit a call recording that they've done either with a customer or with, maybe it could even be a mock call with a peer, where it shows them being able to apply that knowledge. And so having those milestones, and so getting to even looking at, when you say this onboarding program, how do you know when somebody's onboarded? And who defines what that is? Like, whose spec is that? So we've partnered with sales leadership to say, all right, onboarding consists of, and this may vary for every organization, right? But we want our new hires to complete the learning path that we've designed that specifically maps to those no do say show elements. We want them, and I may mess this up, but we want them to, part of that learning path are some knowledge check assessments that we do through a digital platform. We want them to be able to demonstrate that they can articulate the GetLab value proposition. We want them to submit and review and have an account plan, a territory and/or an account plan reviewed and approved with their manager. And then we want to see two more things. We want them to create new opportunity to show that this is demonstrating their ability to add pipeline that didn't exist before. And then last but not least, close their first deal. So really get through the end of that sales cycle to say, once they've done all those things, and you have to measure it, then they become onboarded. And so I think, measurement is absolutely critical.
For sure. And so I love that it's not just like, take this test, right? Show me that you can regurgitate some stuff. It's submit a call for review. There's quantitative and qualitative side to both the measurement of objectively, have I hit this? Yep. Perfect. Another question that we kind of alluded at earlier in the episode, but if we're talking about whether it's Red Hat or GitLab, the company wants to train them on things that are going to be specific for success in your role, or maybe a future role within GitLab. How do you, like, when you're building an professional development program like this, or an enablement program like this, how do you sort of balance the needs of the business versus the needs of the individual? Because if I'm in an SDR role, right, getting to that next role is training me on some AE skills, but there may not specifically be an AE job available. And so, providing me those skills might be providing me a path out of the company. So how do you sort of balance that?
A couple thoughts there. So one, I fundamentally take issue or find fault with this notion of, hey, if we train our people, then they're going to be more apt to leave. Like, no, they're going to leave if you don't train them. If you're not taking care of them and developing them as a person and as a professional, that's going to accelerate their stepping out the door. So I just fundamentally disagree with the notion of that. In terms of the balance, there's no easy answer. It is a notion of, I think some of it comes down to how much change does the organization need to make. And the more change that's happening, and when I say change, I'm distilling it down to looking at gaps within the desired state of what you need your sales team to know and be able to do and be able to articulate, and then what in general folks are able to do today. The larger that gap is, the more time that I would encourage, leadership and executives to devote towards getting things right, righting your ship as the business, and having a much higher percentage of learning and development time allocated to those things, again, to right the ship, to improve the business versus personal. As that gap shrinks, then open it up a little bit more to have more leeway and time for tailored, personalized learning. It just really, it really depends on the scenario. I think the other thing to keep in mind too, is the scope of, the degree of the change and what's needed to close that gap. Sometimes if it's some not all knowledge and behavior gaps are equal. Sometimes they can be closed pretty quickly, and therefore there's more capacity, more time to devote to other learning and development efforts and activities. But some things, if it's a big change initiative that requires, lots of touch and multimodal engagement, then there may not be as much time left for the personal stuff. But I think, what's key in all of that is helping the individual understand, and this will be super intuitive, but it's the WIFM, right? What's in it for me? If you just articulate, hey, the company needs you to do this, you've already lost. You've got to help them understand that this is something you want to do, that's good for you, and get them to opt into it versus it being something that they're being forced to do. And that's a lot easier said than done.
For sure. I think having it in the first place, if you've grown up in a place where, this is always available, you can maybe take it for granted. If you've grown up in organizations that are a little bit more old school, where stuff like this doesn't exist, or if it does, it's like in big, thick binders in HR that aren't really accessible. I think you just appreciate it. Or maybe I just appreciate it a little bit more because I worked in organizations where this stuff like this just didn't exist.
Yeah. And I think another thing that I've come to appreciate over time, particularly in this enablement role, that I think a lot of enablement, some enablement functions get it. Others, particularly newer, right, where it's still a muscle that's being developed, is you got to look at training and enablement. I mean, it's a change management effort. And so investing the time or finding resources that have an understanding of the principles of change management. So at Red Hat, all of my program managers went through pro-side training on their AdCar model and really looking at, dissecting the stages of change. First off, are folks aware of the need to change? Do they have a desire for the change? Do they have the requisite knowledge and ability? And then a critical element is the R in AdCar is reinforcement, right? People forget. The forgetting curve is a known phenomenon. It's a scientific fact that you'll forget. So you have to, as a learning professional, think about how to reinforce and sustain that change over time to improve retention and counter that forgetting.
And so if we talk about just a little bit about sort of pro-sci, basically change management, the AdCar model is one of the models that sort of lives under that umbrella. And I don't know it off the top of my head, so I Googled it just for those. And I'll throw a link for those who are listening and want to sort of learn a bit more. Because I find that little things that got brought up like this are some of the most valuable pieces for me. Because we've got somebody who's deep into this, who's put a lot of time and thought and research. So the more that I can sort of build off of, use your, something that you look to as a positive signal of like, hey, this is something I should pay more attention to, the better. So I'll throw a link there, but the AdCar model is awareness of the need for change, desire to support the change, knowledge of how to change, ability to demonstrate skills and behaviors, and R is reinforcement to make change stick. Yeah. And so you'll actually, you take your sales enablement people and have them and put them through those pro-site courses.
Correct. Yeah. Because as a program manager, let's say tomorrow I hired someone that said, we want to build out a sales manager development initiative. Well, we wouldn't say that. There would be a problem or a challenge that we're trying to solve for, right? And then we'd come up with, all right, what kind of solution can influence those things to drive better outcomes, whatever that's defining, to address the pain or the need. But as part of that, we assess what is the behavior change and the knowledge change that we're trying to impact to get to those better outcomes. And then having that mental framework of how to think through those steps, the AdCar steps, allows for a much more thoughtful approach to really making sure that change ultimately happens. Because training and enablement is not an event, right? You can't just say, all right, we're going to have a webinar and teach people all this stuff and we're done. I even get, still even sales leaders think about I'm not picking on sales leaders, that, hey, at sales kickoff, we need to train everybody on these things, and then they'll be good. Well, no, in many ways, like sales kickoff is just that. It's a kickoff. It's the kickoff of an enablement agenda that's going to take place over a series of months and quarters to reinforce and to make happen and to make stick. So if anything, it's really just introducing some of those concepts, imparting some of the knowledge, but then you've got to think through, how do you turn that knowledge into ability and capability?
100%. And I think that's, we don't need to talk about sales kickoffs too much, but like, if you just focus on this in your sales kickoff, it's sort of like, I'm going to write an essay, but I'm only going to write the introduction. Like the rest of it is just missing.
Yeah. And well, keep going. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, another analogy that I think is helpful to think about is when you think of, hey, what do you Collin, do you play a sport?
Yep. Hockey and triathlon.
All right. So let's pick hockey. Did you wake up one day and were you good at hockey?
I was Canadian, so I was born on skates, man.
It was in your blood. All right.
Yeah. I was I was birthed out of the ice. No, I was terrible. There are videos of my dad like trying to teach me how to skate, and it's just me running on ice. And obviously not skating at all. My dad's just like, my back hurts. You can't see him saying that, but I'm just thinking like, man, if I was doing that, it's that's what I'd be thinking.
Yeah. So I'm guessing once you reach a certain age, probably what your dad did, similar to like a sales kickoff, is he just sat you down on the couch. He gave you an overview of all the things that you needed to do. Maybe he gave you a book, and then you were really good. Is that how it went?
For sure. Yeah. not at all.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, first you need to, like, do you want to play hockey? Yeah, I want to be like the people on the TV. Okay. So you got to learn to skate first. And I had to do power skating and figure skating classes as that's where I started. And it's like, you need to be this good at skating before you can go and jump in, and we're going to get you a stick. Because my parents so we weren't like super rich. They wanted to make sure that, I was going to actually play the sport before they invested the thousands of dollars in buying all the gear.
Yeah. So we could go, dissect it a whole bunch more, but the point is, yeah, it can't just be introducing it at sales kickoff, or even going into even if you have a great interactive, immersive, hands-on experience at sales kickoff, that only gets you so far. Like, you think about those kinds of things. You need to practice, and then you need to apply it, right? Apply it in a safe environment that maybe a mock customer scenario, but then you also need to take the training wheels off and apply it in the real world and continue to learn, continue to iterate, find what works for you, and you continue to hone your craft. And it's just, you think about, well, why don't we take that same approach when you think of selling, mm-hmm. right? And professional selling. I think every salesperson I've met wants to be an expert at their craft, right? Yeah. They are proud of, and rightfully so, proud of being able to deliver value to their customers. So I think that mentality of it being something that you continue to work on and continue to iterate, it makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm. And I love, I never thought about it through this lens, but you're totally right. You mentioned something about sort of spaced repetition or spaced learning. You only learn a certain amount the first time you hear something, and then the brain forgets it. And I think they call it like a half-life. The half-life is pretty brief, but if you're constantly being reminded, if you have to come back to that one skill, on a daily, weekly basis, like if you learn something on Monday and you come back to it on Tuesday, it's going to be, your retention is going to go up dramatically. And then if you come back to it on Thursday and then the next Monday, the odds of that knowledge being integrated into sort of long-term memory are much, much higher. Right. And I remember when I was I used to teach, I taught a lot of hockey. I coached, I taught, but I remember we wouldn't just teach individual skills. You would sort of drill on the skills, and then you would have an opportunity for them to apply the skills. Right. And you would start with some of the basics, sort of weeks, if we were talking about an 8-week program, you start with, week one is the basics, right? We're just going to go around the circles and we're going to coast on our left foot and we're going to push out with our right foot. And you're going to do that until you sort of understand what that motion looks like. Then we're going to do it on the other foot, right? And that's sort of like, we want to get that change going week one, right? But then in week two, we're going to start working on something else. But we also want to give them the opportunity to apply week one skills in sort of an open and sort of not free skate, but in an environment where they're going to see, I'm going to connect the dots between this drill and this is how I skate correctly. And so I think what you're saying is it's not just about the sort of skills training you've got to be in the classroom. You got to teach them a little bit, and then you got to give them the space to actually apply the knowledge and learn and connect the dots on their own.
Absolutely. Yep.
In
fact, there's models out there that say, 70% of what you learn is on the job. It's through that application, like you're talking about. 20% is learning through others and mentoring, shadowing, just asking other folks about how they do that. Only 10% of it's that formal learning piece.
And this, to me, I love this conversation. And obviously GitLab's a fairly large organization, and Red Hat isn't small either. If I'm working in a smaller company, when's the right stage to start having these conversations, to think about, all right, let's start modeling out what our sales learning framework looks like?
Yeah, I think this is also one, it's more art than science. But if we try to boil it down to a simple math equation, I mentioned before, improving sales productivity isn't just about adding capacity. I think early on, it certainly is. So I think it's about, when do you reach the point at where the return on investment of investing in, that additional one headcount in sales is perhaps equal to, if not less than, adding someone that can come in that understands adult learning, can do some of this work to codify what good looks like and proliferate best practices and programatize some of that. What is the value of that person uplifting the entire organization? So let's do some quick math. Let's say you're at 50 salespeople, right? Would you rather add the 51st salesperson, or if you think of even if you're conservative, what percentage improvement would adding a training or enablement, person be to the existing 50 folks that you have? And so make some assumptions, 2% increase in improvement, like whatever that is. At some point, you can, again, you can take that quantitative approach to figure out when it makes sense for your organization. Now, the only caveat I'd say is maybe you even invest ahead of that, right? Because there's also going to be some ramp time for that person to come in and codify what good looks like and understand. So maybe even do it as it's approaching that break-even point.
Gotcha. And so it's looking at, okay, if I've got 10 reps and I can make them, in a program like this can make them 10% better, right? That's the same as adding an 11th rep in terms of productivity.
Right. Yeah.
Gotcha. And then there's all those sort of net benefits later on down the road as you hire 12, 13, 14, 15. Everybody sort of comes with that 10, 15% advantage, as opposed to if you just left them at sort of whatever capacity they were at before.
Yeah. And I think, that's a really simplified view of it. I mean, you can also ask yourself at some point too, like, what are all the soft benefits of, does that provide a better work environment? This embraces culture of continuous learning that, like we talked about earlier, does the retention improve? Can you reduce the attrition risk? Maybe it's too much of a stretch to say, particularly at 10 people, that that attrition will decrease by X%. Those are small numbers, but still, there's some other soft benefits that you really should consider.
Mm-hmm. Totally fair. I really, and you're 100% right. There's never a right or wrong time. It's about like, what is the return on investment, and when can we afford to make this? And like, how does this fit on the culture of the team? But I think, when it comes to having these development conversations, I mean, we did this right from the get-go. There's not a ton of additional cost other than sort of, once a quarter having a conversation. In terms of mapping out some of these things, we did them when we had a team of 5, right? And it wasn't a full-time individual. It was the manager and myself, and we sat down and said, okay, what are the things that they need to be good at? And we sort of took a couple of weeks and we built that out. And it was definitely nowhere near what the level of GetLab is. And we 100% copied from, there's a local company here, Clio, big in the legal software side of things. And they were amazing. And they shared a ton of, their engineering culture, and they had a lot of the level process built out. And they said, here you go, copy all this. And so we took that and we sort of adapted it for different parts of the company. And so I think, if you're sitting here and you're saying, well, I don't have 50 people, I have like 2, I have 5, right? It doesn't mean you can't start doing and start picking out pieces of this. I think one of the best parts of sort of maybe not the best part, but I think one of the amazing resources that are available to you is GitLab, and everything is public. So copy paste. I wish I'm trying to remember like the proper Git command, but it's like git pull, I don't know, something. I knew Git a little bit a long time ago, and I've forgotten all of it. But anyway, use the advantages, or use the resources that are available, and copy paste as much as you can, because we want to be innovating on sort of our product and how to sell. We want to be coaching our people on, how do we get good at selling our specific product when it comes to how to build a sales organization, how to build a sales enablement, how to sort of level up your people. Copy and paste that from everybody else, because it adds value, but it's not sort of, you don't need to innovate on how you run your sales team. You want to innovate on sort of, the way that you're sort of selling, and you want to be focused on, spending your attention on what's unique to our company and our product and our service.
I'm glad you brought that up, because you're absolutely right. And let me give credit where credit's due. Coming in 7 months ago, when I talked about building out the sales onboarding program, yes, there was that job task analysis and understanding, like, all right, which reps really ramped fast? What do they do? What are the things they needed to know? And we've covered that model before earlier. But there was a great amount of content that I leveraged and to just essentially assemble and make it a little bit more of a sequential learning. But there was great work that was already done by the existing team. And it wasn't just the sales managers, it was also the individual contributors. And just the power of those folks collaborating and working together to have, they had some onboarding resources, of course, right? So a lot of it was just tapping into that. So I mentioned earlier, like one of the things I love about GetLab, right, is again, that notion that everybody can contribute. And one of the things that is a cool way that we operationalize that at GetLab is that, especially in our commercial sales organization, but this is littered throughout the company as well, is this notion of give back projects. And the notion is, when you start, like, we all come from different environments, different experiences, different perspectives. We all have something that can improve the existing environment here at GetLab that can come from those prior experiences. So I'll give you an example. The VP of Commercial Sales, Ryan O'Neill, requires that everybody that joins his commercial sales team within the first, and I can't remember if it's 60 days or whatever, but they define on it, they document a give back project where they need to do something that leverages the skills and experiences they're bringing to the table prior to GetLab that can improve something of how we do something at GetLab. And that could be onboarding, it could be a process improvement, it could be anything. But I love that. That immediately starts that culture, that mentality of, look, don't wait for stuff to be spoon-fed to you. We can all make a difference. Another concept that I love, that I'd love to see other organizations adopt it too, but it's we have an entry in our handbook. So if you go to our handbook and search for the term short toes, it's this notion of, we want everybody here to have short toes. We don't want any new folks coming in saying, well, I didn't get involved because I didn't want to step on somebody's toes. No, in fact, we encourage folks to get involved, and for existing folks to welcome and embrace contributions and questions from new folks, because that's really where, if you get multiple perspectives, you get to a better place. Again, it's kind of that open source ethos.
I love that. Short toes.
Yep.
I feel like we could keep going, and we could just talk about this all day, but I want to be cognizant of your time. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Normally we wrap with a cold call, but I figured, better use of our time would be to actually show off one of the things that you've built, and you've got within sort of GetLab, you've got the command of the message piece, or command of the message page. And so this is another page that, David's team was specifically involved in. And so we're going to just take a minute, and this will be in lieu of the normal cold call role play. But David, do you want to just frame up what we're going to look at here?
Yeah, so I mentioned a couple immediate priorities when I joined. One was accelerating time to productivity for new hires. The other is how can we embrace a more customer-centric messaging framework for how we talk with customers, also strategic opportunity qualification to increase our win rates with the customers we're engaged with. So we've partnered with Force Management and have embarked upon a change management initiative to operationalize some of these methodologies. So this is an example, right? So this is on our handbook. So about.getlab.com/handbook. Now, /sales is our sales handbook. And this is something that's publicly available. So here we expose, these are the key value drivers, right? This is why our customers are adopting GitLab's technology. So GitLab is a complete DevOps platform delivered as a single application. And there's no other organization that does that and extends these benefits to our customers in the way that we do so. And so we also talk about, again, publicly, look, these are the things that differentiate GitLab from our competitors. And I already mentioned the single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle. There's a lot of organizations that have deployed DevOps processes often use a myriad of different and disparate tools. And there are a lot of inefficiencies with having to jump from this tool to that tool to this tool. Having everything in one environment helps your developers be that much more productive. It has a number of other benefits in terms of having transparency to the complete workflow of how applications are being developed and deployed, et cetera. And so likewise, all these links, they are publicly accessible. So you can see some of these proof points, a customer deck based on these value drivers, our framework summary. Many organizations would hide those, right? These being oh, we don't want our competitors to see that. Here's one of the stories I love is that we make our roadmap publicly available. We also have, we use these little Harvey balls to indicate what aspects of our product is, we self-assess our maturity and assess it at this point in time, and then also project where do we anticipate and expect to be in terms of that maturity in 6 months or in 12 months, and how do we compare to the competition. We've had our competitors go to that site and give us feedback of saying, hey, you're not properly representing us here for these reasons. And the product manager will say, hey, thanks, I didn't realize that. And we actually update the page to show an accurate representation there. And so that level of transparency of being able to share publicly with our customers where we're going with the product, how we compare with the competitors, and inviting contributions from anybody is just really, really powerful. We get lots of positive feedback from our customers about just how much they enjoy working with a company that embraces those types of, that culture and those types of perspectives.
That takes confidence to be that upfront about here's our competitors and here's what we think. Here's where we think we're strong, and here's where we think that they're strong. I love that you've sort of put together, and I think everybody that's listening, copy that page, right? It doesn't have to be public, but the information that you've got on there. And I've got a link here in the sort of command of the message, in the links to the command of the message page. So you can go and check that out. But they've got the overview of the company. They got the value framework, the differentiators, the sort of core content that everybody needs to know, and then additional resources. This is something that as a salesperson, I haven't seen a company that's this organized in a long time, if ever. So David, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. This is super valuable. If anybody's looking to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
No, great question. Yeah, hit me up. Best way is probably on just email. Send me an email, dsummers@getlab.com. Or yeah, to connect with me on LinkedIn. So,
Right
yeah.
on. Beautiful. David, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.